This is Chapter 3, Cultural and Linguistic Diversity. And in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the definitions of cultural and linguistic diversity. So, nativism. What is it? Nativism has to do with how we feel about other people immigrating to our region. Okay? So, it's really a way of making bigotry okay. And so nativism has to do with how we are going to fight that idea of having someone else be where we want them to be. Okay? Okay, and I found this really neat quote. Let me see if I can find it again real quick. Let's see, I'm not finding it now. But basically, it's how we take over an area. Okay? So when we go back in, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when we would come in and we would kind of oust all of the current inhabitants, and then when someone would immigrate into our area, it's how we feel about them. We feel encroached upon. Okay? So then we come to the melting pot. Now the melting pot was actually a pretty important idea, but it is kind of, we still use it, we just shouldn't be using it. Okay? Cultural pluralism is really where the country is at right now. It says that we shouldn't be giving up our home culture or the things that we do as ethnically, okay? Just to fit into the melting pot. So the melting pot means everybody's together and we're all one big happy family. The cultural pluralism means that you can be part of that, but you still need to retain who you are as a cultural and ethnic person. Let's see, some of these others that you might not be as familiar with. I think a lot of these we're very familiar with. Let's see. Ebonics. That is what we can. That's the name that we give to the dialect of English that we often hear in African American neighborhoods. So let's think about some of the history of the field. So at first, remember where I was talking about the melting pot a minute ago? We first had what we called Americanization, or the melting pot. We wanted to bring everybody in because we felt like everybody has to be the same. Okay? Now, we all know that isn't really true. But it's very definitely given way to this idea of cultural pluralism. Now, cultural pluralism tends to be a dirty word around some people. Now, in the Midwest, they still really believe in the melting pot. I remember when I was working in Indiana, I had a conversation with one of the other professors who, because we did not agree on how diversity should be taught, because he taught it from the melting pot perspective, because he was from the Midwest and that's what he was used to. And it's the belief there that everybody should become as Americanized as possible, meaning that everyone should embrace the Midwestern culture, and that's the only culture that you should see in their homes, in their schools, in the things that they say. And so everybody has to be the same. But it doesn't really work very well because it makes people very unhappy. So, if in a lot of the country, most of the country, it has given way to what we call cultural pluralism. So it means that we can retain what makes us tick. It means that we should continue with the cultural behaviors that we find comfortable and find a way to make those work within the larger community. So, how do we come up with some of these issues? I mean, why are they important and what does the law have to say about them? We've talked a little bit about Diana. We've also talked about Larry P. But we haven't talked about Lau. Okay? These all have to do with how we look at Americanization. Okay? Now, Diana and Larry were strictly looking at how we just how we look at testing, how we look at students, and so then when we think about this, we want to look at Diana. That one was, of course, we talked about IQ tests and how we were using IQ tests to identify Hispanic students as having an intellectual disability and how that was very discriminatory. Okay. Then Larry P. Looked at the overrepresentation of African American kids in special education, especially in intellectual disabilities. Okay? Now, Lau v. Nickel, and this was had to do with Chinese students, but it was brought on behalf of a lot of students whose native language was Chinese. So this was in California. And because that's where I happen to know that it's from California, but there's a very large Chinese population in LA. And so what it said was that the Supreme Court required schools to help students whose home language was not English access the curriculum and participate in instruction at school. Because they were saying, well, they can't speak English, so we can't teach them. And so, as you can see, all of these came out of the 1970s. And so then we have to think about what are some challenges of diversity, okay? We have a lot of challenges, and so when I hear students tell me, oh, I just teach all kids the same, or I'm just going to teach everybody the same way, it just shows that they haven't really given a lot of thought to this, because students of diversity tend to have different types of problems. So, they tend to come from higher poverty homes and neighborhoods, which means that they have limited health care. Now, that's a real hot button topic right now. It has been for the last couple of years. What does limited health care have to do with problems of diversity? We're going to talk about that in our when we get together online. Now, they also tend to have a higher rate of homelessness, and we see a much higher rate of migrancy. Okay? And because they are from poor neighborhoods, typically, they tend to go to more inferior schools. So the schools don't have the type of textbooks that they need. They don't have the internet broadband width. You just think about that by itself and how that can affect school. The teachers there tend to have a lot of kids who come to school unprepared, which means that they tend to learn a little bit differently. And so when we say that we're going to teach everybody the same, we really haven't put a lot of thought into it, because we have to find a way to get around all the other issues that are already weighing down the school with and weighing down those kids with their diverse issues. That doesn't mean that they are diverse English language learners. Doesn't mean that they speak another language. It means because of where they live and because of the color of their skin, they are going to have some unique issues. Okay? They tend to be more hands-on, so lecturing doesn't work so much all the time. You know, when we have large group lecture, that's why we look at these different ways of um, teaching and different grouping methodologies. And then we need to look at what are some experiences of their school failure. Typically, it is not just one student. It's across a neighborhood. And it has to do with some of the issues that they have in those neighborhoods. We also have a much higher chance of that child being identified as a student with some sort of a disability. And they struggle with English language acquisition because they hear another language or English inappropriately spoken or used every place but school. And they also have a very high rate of dropout. All right, so when we think about cultural and linguistic diversity, cultural diversity are those students whose background differ from mainstream American society. Now, that could be anybody. That could be the child in the Chinese neighborhood. It can also be that child in Appalachia, America. Now, the Chinese child, has a different ethnic, racial, and cultural background. The child in Appalachia, that while they may be white, technically, their cultural understanding of the world is very different from the mainstream child in New Mexico or in New York City or any place else. If you've ever been to Appalachia, it is a very, very different experience. I was in Appalachia when I was in college on a mission trip, and I was completely shocked to find out that the child who went to school was the one who had shoes that they could wear to school, because you can't go to school if you don't have shoes in the wintertime. And so things like this actually still happen. And so I know states like Kentucky and Tennessee, they've worked very hard to take care of some of these problems. But the poverty is, they have some of the highest poverty in the entire country. Now, we think here in New Mexico we have high poverty. If you ever have a chance to go to Appalachia, you will be surprised, believe me. So then when we look at diversity and disability, the connection between the two of them, we have a very, very high level of disability in diverse children. Now, part of this is because of lack of health care when they are still in utero. Okay, before they're born, if their mother does not have access to health care, they're going to probably be having some problems of some sort. Also, just the lack of services in those neighborhoods can increase that probability. So we have a lot of challenges that go along with this idea of what is diversity and how does it affect my classroom.